was built on. And I want to thank Paul again. You've inspired us this morning and reminded us the importance of true leadership. However, you're welcome back anytime, but we want you to bring your mom. With that, thanks to Paul again, and I'll bring up now Tony Tessarola to introduce our next session.
Thank you, Matthew. And as Ray makes his way up, I'll just start an introduction for him. So I got some feedback earlier this morning that the board candidates are required to introduce the speakers, that we should maybe try to spice it up a little bit. So I've got two versions of introduction for Ray. So here's the first one. So Dr. Ray Wickenheiser is currently the director for the New York State Police Crime Lab System in Albany. He's a member of ASCLAD, a member of the board, and is currently the past president. And he has over 35 years of forensic science experience. Okay, so that's number one. Here's the second version. At 6 feet, 9 inches, at power forward, in his 35th year from the University of Regina, Dr. Ray Wickenheiser.
Okay, I'm not expecting that kind of an introduction ever again. That was fantastic. Thank you, Tony. Thanks again to Paul Butler. That was absolutely an outstanding presentation, and so I got a really tough act to follow, so I was kind of wondering how am I going to come up with that, and it's like, okay, so with all that excitement, in comes my monotone to kind of lull you back to the normal state of us scientists. So the talk today, I'll be on forensic genealogy and the Golden State Killer. So looking forward to sharing that with you. I went back to school because it's like helped me. I can't stop going back to school, but it was a lot of fun. Enjoyed it. The kids are gone, so what else am I going to do with my time? So I worked on some bioethics, so I'm going to be able to share some of that with you. So a little bit of an outline of what I want to cover today is talk about a transition of what we do from really icing on the cake for investigators to help kind of confirm their suspicions. Here's a suspect, and now what we can do really to serve them with investigative leads. I want to talk about forensic genealogy and how it's broken out and what we can do with it as a tool, again, to serve the cases that we work on. Talk about a case scenario. Obviously, I've kind of tipped my hand. We're going to talk about the Golden State Killer case, others kind of like it, and talk about some of the bioethics and try to look at both sides and how we can really kind of try to find that balance, again, to serve. Talk about some of the ethical concepts, including proportionality and what I can see as considerations for a path forward. So when you consider, because I was actually around doing cases in the 80s, and those of you who are out there can kind of recognize by the number of gray hairs, and I kind of look at what my picture looked like as somebody actually gave it to me back on the board, when we had kind of that by the front door, what I looked like and what I look like now. But we could only proceed with a case when we had a suspect, and we thought we had lots of cases. And then that transition to being able to provide with IT databases where now we can transition to providing investigative leads. Before we were working towards just doing cases for court, trying to make those court dates. And really it is absolutely a resource issue and how we struggle to get those to try to fulfill the mission of providing investigative leads, because we can provide that suspect name when the investigation is essentially run out of steam. So when you consider what we do, and when I say we, I'm talking about all the people we serve. Folks among us go out to crime scenes. They have to ID all of those things with biological potential. I'm really focusing on biology, but it works for all of our disciplines. Find that sample, bring it to the crime lab, we put everything we have into it, we develop that profile. It's going to be probative, it's going to mean something to that case, it's very likely from the suspect, and 40 to 50% of the time, if we're lucky, we built a database so we can provide an investigative lead. That's unbelievable. And you think about how much effort goes into that, and that's big success, but 50 to 60% of the time we come up short. And these are stranger kinds of investigations. We have run out of suspects in terms of investigative agency. What do we do with those cases? So in the beginning, you had cases like Colin Pitchfork, kind of the beginning of DNA. You go out and you sample people. What do investigators do? We have the silver bullet, we have the crime scene profile, we can solve that case, but we have to get that suspect. So when you consider, again, put this out before, the forensic fire station model, when you have a fire, you have resources sitting at the fire station to come rush to your fire. What do we do at the crime lab? We're given enough resources that's how much taxpayers are willing to provide. We go out and provide and do the best we can. It's not modeled to provide that level of service, and we juggle the cases the best we can, but it's kind of like phoning the fire station and saying, hey, my house is burning down. Sorry, I have a backlog of fires. Hang on, we'll get to yours in a few days. So we are burning tremendous investigative resources while we're struggling to get the resources in place to deliver the service we can provide. So somewhere in here is how do we convey as lab leaders, this is what we can do, and this is the potential outside of our four walls to really apply what we can do in a more effective fashion to help our investigators serve the cases and the very people that are impacted by the crimes. So just some of the examples. For example, in the state of New York, we had a prison escape, you might have heard from Dannemora, called it the Clinton prison break. We had 2 escaped killers. And I'm very fortunate, and our superintendent sits on our commission, Forensic Science. As much as we could debate the goods and bads about the commission, the fact that I get the opportunity to meet with my superintendent every 3 months and talk about the issues of the crime lab, I get to also hear back to him the impact of the work we do. So we were helping with DNA, fingerprints, and other things to try to help provide investigative leads to help find these 2 gentlemen. It was costing the state police $1 million a day in overtime to shift the resources over 1,000 people from one area of the state to another when we found the DNA and we turned it around in 12 hours. And obviously we know what that means. You're shifting resources away from other cases, but when public safety is at risk, that's what we do. But just the concept of every one of our cases is a little Dannemora, and they're sitting in a pile, and how do we do our job to try to advocate for every case to do the best with what we do? So when you're looking at crime scene DNA, here's our opportunity. Just like we found that DNA and the superintendent was able to reallocate 1,000 people to the right location and provide public safety, we're providing that information on every case. So what do we do with crime scene DNA? Crime scene DNA, is there any ethics to it? What do we do with it? So it's considered abandoned DNA, abandoned fingerprints. We own that, so to speak. There's no Fourth Amendment right for any perpetrator, so to speak, for that DNA. In fact, you could argue, what is the mission of the crime lab? It's to maximize the value of evidence. So, in fact, it's our duty to interrogate that sample to the maximum capability to help our investigators help solve that crime. So when you think of what the new tools are that are now coming or already here. So phenotyping, you've got extra DNA, so to speak. We've analyzed it. You don't have a hidden CODIS. What can you do with it? And I'm sure the vendors would love to tell you about what we could do with eye color, hair color, ancestry in terms of what the heritage of the person is, what part of the world that their family originated from. However, there's limitations, obviously, because knowing what a person may look like doesn't get you necessarily that known sample, because that's the whole ace in the hole we have is we've got that crime scene sample, we just got to develop that suspect. But there's a lot of variation, and how do we go out and sample people? And now comes the new tools. So the capability we have to provide that investigative lead is really our opportunity. So now we're branching out and partial matching, whether you've done it or not. You maybe have, and many states do. You find a sample in the work we do, and DNA is inherited. We see the comparison where it's very, very close. Do we look away when we see DNA coincidentally or through our database searches that look really, really similar? No, we don't. It's a very inefficient tool. It's accidental, but we've absolutely solved cases. We've solved one in New York where we solved a serial killer, Bitroff case, where we found a brother who was in the database, matched the individual. Poor tool, but it still works and we won't look away. Familial searching, now shifting as opposed to like waiting for the fish to wash up on shore, actually casting a net out and looking for familial similarities. It certainly has helped us in solving cases, but it's limited. And it also has the extra issue of interrogating people that you know are false, are not the actual perpetrator, and people who don't want to be in the database. Is that really the mandate of what CODIS is? But it is a tool, and we're absolutely, part of our duty is to look into it and potentially use it. So enter forensic genealogy. We do STRs with the Ancestry.com and various other direct-to-consumer DNA. The fact that people can have the SNP profiles, and it has become incredibly cheap. When you look at the human genome and how many people had to work on that for years to actually create the human genome, now for $1,000 you get your entire genome done. The idea for $59 you can give a Christmas present to somebody and get their ancestry done, covering 800,000 SNPs, is kind of almost mind-blowing what the technology can do. So, again, a lot of people a lot smarter than me discovering that potential of people want to be found, finding their relatives, the idea that they're in databases waiting to be found, looking for others, isn't that kind of our job? So entering that information into a database, you probably heard of by now GEDmatch, where people have been okay with being found. Couldn't that be an opportunity for us to help solve that other 60% of the cases? Short answer is yes, it is, and hence the Golden State Killer and other cases like it. So far, 50 or so have been solved. So using metadata, when you do get those familial leads as far out as third or fourth cousins, now building family trees, and then at the end of the day, comparing it directly to that person. So I'll call it a surreptitious sample. At some point, do you ruffle the feathers of potential family members to do that direct comparison because you have the crime scene DNA? You could go to them directly, but recognizing there might be issues, you can follow them around, get the same discard DNA, not bother anybody. End of the day, we're all about getting direct comparison. You can eliminate people with 100% certainty, or you can include them, and hence help solve that crime. So I've got a summary table coming up, but with forensic genealogy, just trying to do a little bit of a comparison with CODIS and the differences between the two. There has been a recent change. I've got a couple slides on it with respect to what GEDmatch has done. But I'll say, as of a week ago, when this was finalized, there's about 1.2 million folks who've put their DNA, actually got it done by an ancestry company, made deliberate decision to move their DNA into this database saying, I'm willing to be found. There's a disclaimer every time you log in red that says, hey, this database can be used for law enforcement. Know that going in. If you're not comfortable, take your DNA out. But the key point is, if you don't say anything, your DNA is going to be left in. So that is really known as an opt-out strategy. How many of you have cell phones? I'm kind of making the assumption every single person does. How many of you have read the disclaimer that comes with that cell phone? Okay, certainly Anya would because she's a quality person. Probably Brooke too, but other than that, I'll be honest, I have not read it. I skimmed it and then signed off on it, like I do as a lab director because that's what I'm taught to do. Kidding, of course. So people don't read it. I'm sort of, I used to think of myself as lazy, but no, I'm efficient. So I just check the box. So that's typically what 80–85% of the people do, but have you really performed your due diligence in terms of informed consent? So when you consider, back to the bioethics piece, what does autonomy mean in bioethics? It means that a patient has a right to their body, right to treatment, and to make their own decisions, and that is absolutely a fundamental underlying condition, and nobody questions that. So if I have decided that I've chosen to put my DNA into a database, and if coincidentally my second cousin, third cousin, or fourth cousin who's committed some undue act happens to be held to task for it, it's my capability, as long as I have informed consent, of allowing myself, my DNA, to go into that database. Okay, so I'll talk about a little bit more of that in a moment. Just wanted to do a little comparison because there is sometimes a little bit of confusion between forensic genealogy and familial searching. So first, to look at the profile. We do STRs, or short tandem repeats. That's how CODIS Endus was built. That DNA is non-coding, other than amylogenin, which will tell you male and female, comes up essentially with a human serial number. That's how it was sold and packaged. It serves us extremely well, is responsible for incredible amounts of investigative information going back to our investigators, solves all kinds of crimes. The profile in forensic genealogy, again, just the miracle of technology, 800,000 SNPs in terms of points of comparison. So you can already see 20 STR loci, 800,000 SNPs. So what that allows is an incredible increase in terms of resolution, that even with a much smaller database, instead of looking at immediate family members like familial searching, you're now expanding that family tree in order to get people that that person probably has never met in their life and doesn't even know exists. So out to probably 800 or 1,000 individuals captured in that family tree. And if you do the math, 300,000 individuals in the US, if you got 1 million of them, it's, again, big assumption, but assuming even distribution, you're talking about, you can get a law enforcement officer within 300 people of that known sample you have at the crime scene. Now, it's not true it's an even distribution, but you can get how somebody's going to be able to say that if you use this tool, you're going to be able to solve 60%, and as those databases increases, move to 90% of those cases. When we find a crime scene profile, we're going to be able to solve that case. How big of a deal is that? To me, it's the most exciting opportunity, essentially, since we started applying DNA to solving crimes. So, of course, changes are being made, and so BuzzFeed came out with this, and Jan kind of poked me with the elbow during the Asia meeting and said, hey, look at this, look what has happened. And the original take is disaster. Oh my God. They have changed their policy from opt-out to opt-in. People are going to have to make the conscious choice. Well, think about it. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? The fact that people have to say, you know what, I'm going to make a choice that I'm going to help solve crime. Should I be doing it or not? So it'll be an interesting study. At this point, in essence, what that means is that database goes down to zero and will now have to be rebuilt, but rebuilt by people saying, yes, I'm willing to have my sample and database, I'm willing to be searched. I'm okay with that. These are the people who've deliberately taken their profiles from Ancestry or whichever company, moved them over, and made the choice that they're willing to be found. I'm looking for relatives. Oh, by the way, am I also okay with law enforcement checking it over and catching somebody like the Golden State Killer? So it'll be interesting to see how this gets populated. The case that underlies it, and I like to blame Jay Henry for everything. Of course, this sort of fit right into that model. Of course, I'm kidding. There was a case in Utah, and the actual conditions of, I'd say conditions of employment, terms of service, was that they would only allow this for homicides and rapes. It was an egregious case, and there was fear that that individual would come back who had assaulted a 71-year-old, strangled her until the point of unconsciousness, and she came back to and strangled again, that the crime would escalate. So you can call it an assault, if that's what you want to call it, but it didn't fit the terms of service. So what they did is change the terms of service, change it from also, if you want to go in the database, opt-in versus opting out. Again, we talked about the impact, but now include, and they have expanded it to homicide, non-negligent manslaughter, aggravated rape, robbery, and aggravated assault. So trying to capture more, I feel that what they're looking at is much the way I look at it, the long game, and seeing how this is going to play out. And there is still a potential for a court order or a subpoena in order to get to those records. Not saying that that should be done, but it could be done. So I'll talk about the Golden State Killer. It always helps when you have a poster child for whatever that new case is going to be. So the very first case, nobody was warned in that database, so I'm sure those arguments will play out. But the fact that you've got somebody who has committed 13 homicides, at least 50 sexual assaults that you know about, who escalated in terms of recidivism from a peeping Tom to the point that he was killing not only individuals but couples, is somebody, a judge, again, rhetorical question, going to look at that case and say, you know what, you didn't get him fair and square, let's throw him back out there. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out, but just the idea that somebody could do that amount of damage in their criminal career. And being one, like Max Houck, loves to do the numbers to demonstrate what we do. The average cost of a homicide, if you look at it, the cost of a human life, all of this stuff has been mathed out. It's for approximately $4 million. The cost of a rape, over $100,000. The fact that somebody, the rapists that we deal with, average number, I used to use 8, that's an older number, maxed out 7.7. The amount of crime that you could solve he alone is worth $100 million of direct damage to society. And those are the kinds of cases that we deal with. And somewhere we have to balance in the bioethics the good versus the bad, and in comes proportionality. So when you have those kinds of high performers, so to speak, in terms of the damage they perpetrate on society, you can see there's a lot of low-hanging fruit and forcing decisions as long as you're looking at both sides and what those investigative costs are. So I'll just sort of skip to the chase because I'm kind of keeping an eye on the time here. As I mentioned with the crime scene profile, we own it. There's no bioethical or legal issue. We can fully interrogate it. It's a Fourth Amendment Supreme Court decision, albeit a little bit older. We provide investigative aid. That's our job. So when you look at the ethical issues on the con side, we know we're looking at innocent people in these databases because we didn't get a hit directly. So we know that. So you're including people who are in the database, whether it's ENDIS or whether it's GEDmatch, they're innocent people. You're looking at innocent people. So they have rights to privacy. Certainly people in ENDIS, you could say, well, they've done something to belong in there. But then on the flip side of GEDmatch, you've got people who are voluntarily there who now will be opting in. So there's definitely the slippery slope argument. We all know what DNA can be used for. We'll talk about insurance issues. We'll talk about health problems. Do we care that somebody's going to get cancer of the liver? We just want to get the profile so we can make that direct comparison to the crime scene. Okay, so that's the cons, the pros. Public safety, recidivism, the damage to society. Can we do it respectfully and get the best of both worlds? And this, we don't judge those offenders going in, somebody else does it for us. Can we interrogate those samples? So we have strict use of policies. There's been no problems with ENDIS. Can we do the same thing with familial searching? With penalties for misuse, I believe we can. Talked about the crime scene, and certainly we own that. With respect to the database, now with the change to GEDmatch, in terms of the long game, in my opinion, the fact that people will now opt in, and when you consider victims' rights groups haven't even been engaged. When victims' rights, making those kind of choices, what do you think their opinion is for people putting themselves in that database or not? And if we have rules in place for the strict use of it and a structure, and again, who should be doing this? We're the stewards of forensic science. We're the people who are neutral and are looking at the long game. I'm expecting, hopefully, to have my job today, tomorrow, and several years from now. It's up to us to build this appropriately so that we balance both sides, respect privacy, and are still able to solve crime. So from informed consent, what's required? Pertinent information is provided, understanding of the implications, and no undue pressure, and I believe that's what's in place for this new opportunity with GEDmatch. So the concept of proportionality really quickly is, in essence, is the juice worth the squeeze? And as long as we're covering both sides, I believe the answer is yes. So just the key points, and I see I'm running low on my time, just to wrap up. What are those points that I feel that we should consider including in whatever policy we have and develop going forward? Obviously, we've got to have a full profile at a crime scene. We've got to have enough DNA that we can add the extra profile. If there's no match in CODIS, such a nice short little sentence, what does it actually mean? It means we've done it in an accredited lab. We've had all those things and rules that go with the FBI QAS. It's a quality sample. Everything is safeguarded. So that carries, as you know, pages and pages of quality requirements. And folks like Brooke and Anya, who are on that for quality, will make sure we're on the straight and narrow. The fact that we have enough DNA that we can redo the testing and not jeopardize the case. The fact that we've expended investigative resources. I don't like the term exhausted because we'll never exhaust all of our resources, but we've expended sufficient investigative resources. Obviously, we haven't got a hit. This is a stranger case. Is this the right case to do? And sticking to major cases like homicide, I feel that's a tipping point. I don't feel that for most people, they mind a little invasion of privacy to get the benefit of the public safety. Okay, and with CODIS, again, making sure that we keep on the straight and narrow, and again, same recommendations. So just to bring this home, my wife force feeds me medical shows when I get home. I guess I need to be healthier. So she was showing me a taping of Dr. Oz, and on came CeCe Moore, and she's been on TV an incredible amount with Parabon. and they had a victim's family, and they were impacted by crime, and those are the folks we deal with every day. We don't see them, we're behind the scenes, but they're impacted by crime, they've lost a family member. And the take home that Dr. Oz, as he sums up, and I was bracing myself for what's Dr. Oz gonna say because I see him as neutral, you know. And he's a daytime performer, he's a doctor, what's he gonna say? And essentially looks into the camera and says, I want every one of you to go out and put your DNA into GEDmatch so you can help solve these crimes. So to me, that's to bring it home, that those are the people we serve. What's the impact on the people? And as long as we're balancing the public safety with the personal rights, they're the ones that make the decisions. They'll make the decision where they want to be in GEDmatch. They'll make the decision that we're doing the right thing. We need to be open and transparent, saying this is what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. So as long as we can do that, this is too great of an opportunity for us to squander. We're the stewards of forensic science, and this is an opportunity like no other to be able to do the kind of jobs that we do. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and if you have any questions, love to see you and talk about this at any one of our receptions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ray. Our next presenter is Sydney Holt. Sydney has worked as a criminalist at a variety of institutions. She's also worked as a researcher and as a DNA technical leader. She currently serves as the Chief Scientific Officer at Verigen, where she's focused on advancing massively parallel sequencing and other powerful tools to improve public safety and global justice. Her presentation today is entitled The Modern DNA Intelligence Landscape, End of the Cold Case as We Know It.